Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could please settle down. Let's please settle down as we're about to commence with today's proceedings. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your indulgence, and we do apologize for starting a bit early. You are all very early and we're starting exactly on time. We do appreciate your indulgence. My name is Karabo Mahali. I'm a counselor at ICASA and I'm going to be facilitating today's engagement. Allow me to stand on the already established protocols, but also just to mention, ladies and gentlemen, that we are joined by our esteemed panelists that are going to be leading today's conversation. We're joined by the Auditor General of South Africa, and that is Ms. Tsakani Maluleke. She is South Africa's first woman to lead in this position, and with a background in chartered accountancy, she has pioneered quite a lot of interventions in the South African government. She's very passionate about accountability, very passionate about ensuring that we make use of our finances correctly and efficiently. She always reminds us that there is a lack of accountability that has been normalized in society, and we need to be able to speak out against it and root it out. She will be joined by the Statistician General of South Africa, and that is Mr. Risenga Maluleke. I do take note that the surnames are exactly the same. It's a positive sign that the surname is quite powerful. You know us, it's a very, very powerful surname. He is the Statistician General of South Africa, that is the custodian of our nation's data. He's a trained mathematical statistician and has dedicated over 2 decades towards doing this work. He always says something that is very important, that the numbers that Stats SA provides us are open for contestation, but he says his methods are beyond reproach. So essentially he says you can keep your opinions to yourself because he uses a scientific method to arrive at certain conclusions. So let's give our esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. We want to take a different approach to today's panel, ladies and gentlemen. We're saying to the AG and SG in the holding room that we've been having very heated conversations for the past couple of days. And at the center of those heated conversations is how we are all trying to evade accountability. If you're a politician, you blame the bureaucrats. If you're a bureaucrat, you blame the politician. And the question at the center is, who really is at fault? And I think it's important for us to have that reflection, but also before the AG and SG gives us their inputs and their presentation, we just want to get feedback in terms of what have you thought about the conversations that have been taking place. What questions really would you want them to answer in some of their inputs? So we're just going to take 3 hands, be short and crisp. We've got professors in the house. They've got capacity to submit monologues and dissertations. So let's please be as crisp as possible. I think we're just trying to give the AG and SG a sense of the conversations that we've been having in the past couple of days. So if we can have someone to assist us with a roving mic so that we can be able just to take some of those inputs and just highlight what could have been those key interventions, critical areas that have been highlighted by our previous speakers. We had the Provilinkomo lecture yesterday that was led by the former Minister of International Relations, Dr. Naledi Pandor. We had the Premier of Limpopo as well, Dr. Popira Matuba, also making critical interventions. So we just want to hear from the audience in terms of what are some of those areas that you'd want us to reflect on. If we can just have just 3 hands, please. One hand. Are we comfortable? Nobody wants to make a reflection, right? There's a second hand, there's a 3 hand. Thank you so much. DDJ?
Thank you. Good morning, Bangwanat. I just wanted to also add that they are from this province, so it's critical. Prof. Makanya, we are fine this year. But good morning to everyone. Mine will be a short one because, you know, there has been a different approach to what the Auditor General has been emphasizing lately, especially on performance related auditing. And I would like to understand and to learn more maybe, especially from a government perspective, what is that approach and what should be the emphasis going forward on professionalization, on accountability, on governance, especially when it relates to how all of those influence service delivery, because now it's no longer about counting the numbers, as Mwana next to you will say, but it's more about what that count does to service delivery. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
No, thank you very much, Program Director. My real name is Stumo. Masilela is my surname. I'm from TUT. And greetings to everyone in the house. No, I think I have two questions. Which one I think it more or less the same linking with the latter speaker in relation to ensuring that the outcomes of the audit interlinked with the service that people get, which I think is something that Prof. Somadoda hinted it yesterday, to say you will find that a municipality is getting a clean audit, hence there are challenges of service delivery. So I just want to check with the Auditor General as to say, how can we best make the two to correlate? Then the last one goes to our statistician. I'm interested. I'm interested in how do they conduct this process, because my last time to interact with them, particularly the field, I don't know what they call it, field officials who are doing the actual accounting. I think it was back then, it can be as far as 1990s, around there. But from time to time, we get the numbers. Maybe I'm unable to understand how do they arrive at that. But lastly, the accounting is made up of those who are documented in South Africa, or is inclusive of everyone who's in South Africa. So those my area of interest.
Thank you very much. The last hand.
Thank you, and greetings to everyone in the house. More especially Ms. Maluleka. I'm Pumla Stemba from the Eastern Cape Cocta. I would start reflecting from Manali's lecture from last night. One of the things she mentioned that kept me awake last night is, how do we become different kinds of public servants? What kept me awake is the fact that currently, if you are a whistleblower, it's like you're giving up your life. And I was asking myself, am I ready to leave my kids orphaned? And it really kept me awake. I thought about it a lot. Is when you become a different kind of a public servant, what the issues or things that you'll be raising will be regarded as exposés. So you're putting your life at risk. And I kept on questioning myself, well, Koti, am I ready to be a different kind of a public servant? That's number one. And secondly, the previous speaker has touched on what I wanted to talk to, clean audits versus service delivery. So I'm not going to elaborate on that point.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. Our topic, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be led by our different esteemed speakers will be focusing on exactly what you have all been reflecting on. It's a very difficult conversation for us to have, but it's an important conversation for us to have. It's critical for us to reflect on our failures and ensure that there is collective responsibility in the work that we do. And we're really honored that we're going to be having these two esteemed speakers leading this conversation. And our theme is confronting the public sector financial crisis, leadership accountability, and the pathway forward. And we just want to say that this is not just an abstract, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be discussing lived experiences of people and how do we ensure that the promises that we make to the people of South Africa are not broken but are rather fulfilled. It is about whether freedom translates into service and we ensure that there is transformative justice in South Africa. One of the critical areas that I think has become a topical issue, AG, is when there was a conversation of whether clean audits speak to service delivery. And it was sparked by a comment by the president in a different setting. But what was quite refreshing was that people actually know the Auditor General and they understand the work that the Auditor General does, which is a good thing. Whether you want to debate service delivery versus clean audits, of course, that is debatable, but I think it was refreshing to see and understand that we understand that there is a need for there to be accountability frameworks, for us to have measurability in the work that we do. And I think today as we engage, audit findings and of course the statistical evidence, I think these two powerful streams of accountability will assist us to diagnose the problem and ensure that we put efficient and effective mechanisms in place to try and resolve the problem. We're always so good at raising and pinpointing what the challenges are, but we need viable solutions. We need critical interventions that are going to impact and change the lives of the people of South Africa. And I think this conversation that we're going to be having should be a mirror of what it is that we want to see. So when we're saying we're building a capable state, what does that look like? When we're saying this is the state that we've been speaking about, what does it look like? So that we're able to know when we have achieved it and when we have not achieved it. Therefore, it's important that when we have this conversation, we think about the daily lived experiences of the most marginalized in South Africa. And I think the biggest thing, ladies and gentlemen, for us to remember is that as they're going to be speaking about figures and the different audits, we're speaking also in the background around whether people get access to clean water, whether people have access to uninterrupted electricity, whether people have access to jobs. That is at the center of the work that these two critical institutions of government are actually doing. And I think our challenge that might seem simple and easy is quite difficult because we need to be able to ensure that when we're done, we've got the know-how on ensuring fiscal integrity, rebuilding trust amongst the citizens, and ensuring that there is service delivery and we're held accountable for the role that we all play in our different individual capacities in the state. And we really do hope that as we engage, ladies and gentlemen, we take bold and decisive interventions to the fore and we build this capable state that we're speaking about. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome the Statistician General of South Africa, Mr. Risenga Maluleka.
Karabo, Program Director. I'm not a very good public speaker, so if I happen to stammer or struggle, just finish for me. Whatever you finish for me will work very well for this engagement. I was talking to someone and was saying, Karabo, that go and talk to your sister. It looks like you and your sister are telling too many truths. So I said, well, we know nothing from our heritage other than truth. So I will go in, now I can tell her publicly that she must continue with the truths she's telling, because even myself, I tell truths. So I want to start with firstly, for those who have never loved mathematics and arithmetic, particularly mathematics, let me assure you that by the time we finish this presentation, you will go and register for a degree in mathematics. You will realize how easy it is. But let's start with counting, whether we count documented or undocumented migrants. We count everyone. The statistician general is responsible for everyone who's within the borders of the country. Because official statistics is about long-term planning. It's not just about the here and now. The here and now we can deal with. We can collect our administrative records. A nurse at a hospital will know how many people come to collect medication, whether it's chronic medication or it's medication for headache, and they can plan for that. But long-term planning in terms of knowing what we must do in the future, we always have to count everyone. I'm not encouraging lawlessness, but also my job is not to go and report the undocumented migrants and say, police minister, go and find them. They are that side. No. The SARS commissioner is a good friend of mine, Ed Kieswetter, but I don't tell him about those who are not paying tax. My job is to make sure that we collect all information on income. So we leave that to Ed Kieswetter, the SARS commissioner, and for those who are not accounting well in terms of the finances of the state or the public funds, we leave that to my sister Tsakani. So a good example is this about documented or undocumented migrants. If an undocumented migrant is driving their vehicle and they are on-ramping on a freeway, the freeway doesn't say to them, please hang on, I want to know if you are documented or undocumented. If they go to switch on a light on the wall, it doesn't ask them, please, before you switch on, or before I switch on or give you light, I want to know if you are documented or undocumented. The bathroom doesn't ask them when they want to flush, if they are documented or undocumented. So that's how it is. There was a question as to those that haven't met our field workers since the 1990s. So one of the things is that in the census, we are supposed to reach out to everyone, but we know it's practically impossible. So that is why we conduct what we call the post-enumeration survey, to be able to come up with the undercount that we will adjust the population to. So 1996, we were sitting at about 10% undercount. We set at 14%, 2001, 2011, about almost above 14%. And in 2022, we were sitting at 31%. And everyone got scared that 31% undercount, but we have been able to adjust. We went to reach out 17.4 million household dwelling units. We counted 42 million people, and out of 42 million people, using the undercount, the highest in the Western Cape and the lowest in the Free State. Highest was 35% in the Western Cape, 35.58 to be exact, and 20% in the Free State. We adjusted accordingly, came back to 62 million. And having arrived at that, that was the estimate population. So how we count is that when we come and we don't find you, and I saw Miss Aimuko, she was one of our district managers. If we come and we don't find you, we don't spend time chasing you, hoping we'll find you when we must be counting people who are available. We go count people, and then if we find time, we'll come back. But if we never find time, there is no availability. We'll deal with you in the post-enumeration survey. Whereas in sample surveys, we take about 30,000 dwelling units, where we reach about 86,000 to 116,000 people. And then like in the quarterly labor force survey, we take 30,000 households out of 17.4 million households, and we are able to adjust to the national figure. So it requires a lot of mathematical iterations to come to that. Miss Aimuko is seated there. If you want to ask her more about sampling, she will tell you. She was a district manager for our office for more than a decade. I don't know who stole her, but if we were to find her back, we would bring her back to Stats SA because she did a great job when she was there. Now, let us start. They say they want me to talk about building the capacity of the state. But I'm going to, and Karabo, if I have to stop, just make me stop. Yeah. We have 3 laws that we are for, or guidelines. Firstly, it's our own. Let me take note of our ministers, deputy ministers, and of course, SAPAM leadership and everyone. I will rest on the protocols we have established, Karabo, so that I'm not seen to have skipped other people. And when we leave here and go home, Tsakani says to me, but you didn't note me. And now, but with her, even if I skip her, she knows that even if she skips me, it's in the family. So, yeah. And it's done with good intent. So, but it makes me, now that I've spoken about politicians, so in the last census, we wanted to go and count, and I'll use the president because he won't beat me up. We wanted to go and count him, and at the time we wanted to go and count him, he was not available. He became available later. So they made available Deputy President, the then and late Deputy President Mabuza, to say, no, he can meet with the census team. And the president has a very busy schedule. So we said, yes, we'll meet with the Deputy President, but we still have to go and count the president. Our data has equality. There's no box where we put data that this is for the president, or this is for our ministers or our business leaders. They have special, it's equal. Even when it's made available, there is nothing like we go and brief the president and ministers up front, and then they say, well, maybe wait for 2 days. The president, ministers, members of cabinet, captains of industry see our numbers released at the same time equally as we release them to the public. So that is where we carry independence. But of course, we follow the Statistics Act and indeed the African Charter on Statistics and the United Nations Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics. And we don't measure input indicators. So don't come and ask us about the budgets and say how much is our budget, how much should we have as a department. We don't measure how much services, how many people you must be seeing during the day, but we measure output, how many houses are built and how many people access those, those houses in the form of outcomes. Impact is not ours. Impact is for people who will always look at policies and the like. We don't evaluate policies, we just make numbers available. Angus Deaton writes a book. It's called The Greatest Escape. This one is not working. It works when it likes. Yeah, Angus Deaton writes a book called The Greatest Escape, that we have always a temptation to want to rush to solve problems without understanding what the problem is. So we always have to understand the problem. And indeed, numbers are the ones that should actually always tell us if we are making progress or not. We are guided at the center by the National Development Plan. So all the way to the local level, at the provincial level, provincial growth and development strategies, IDPs at local level, and if we go further, we look at SADC protocols, Agenda 2063, all the way to global, to sustainable development goals at a global level. So what happens is, unless where we have to disaggregate, where we must use an indicator, that indicator must remain the same. We already know the census that was contested at some stage, and it was very interesting. When we came back in February 2022 and said there were 62 million people, and there are so many professors, and I'm saying it with all respect here. I have a lot of respect for professors, because when I was small, I didn't know the difference between a prophet and a professor. But I discovered later that a prophet tells you about the future, and the professor prepares you for the future. So somehow they connect at some stage. So there were 2 professors who raised an issue that Stats SA overestimated the population. It shouldn't have been 62 million in February 2022. It should have been 61 million. But the municipalities were saying, but you underestimated. So imagine as statistician general, when they say you overestimated, you move from 62 to 61. And they say you underestimated, you run back to your 62, and they say, but you still have underestimated, you run to 63. It means that we would not be knowing what we are doing. So that's why there has to be independence. That is why we have the South African Statistics Council, which is nominated by, from members of the public, and the term will be open very soon to advise the statistician general so that we stay on a solid grounds. Our job is to defend our methods. You can challenge us, but you must know when you enter the boxing ring, we will have our gloves on. And those are technical gloves. They are not those ones like Mike Tyson and the like. So when you come, in one language, they would say, Tana ulongile, come ready. Yeah. Now, our population, 16.1 million. I will use at the top, at the bottom, on the left, right, so that you understand. My teacher in arithmetic, when the inspectors came to inspect how he was teaching, he used to tell us, if you know the answer, raise your right hand. If you don't know the answer, the left hand. And the teacher will point the kids whose right hands were up. And then the inspectors were always very happy that he teaches very well. So, right at the top, right at the top, Gauteng, we can see it's leading 16.1 million, followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 12.2 million. And the share is right at the bottom. A quarter of the population of our country is in Gauteng, 25.5%, 19.4% in KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal was the most populous province, but it has been overtaken. And when I go to KwaZulu-Natal, and I will be there again on Friday, they always say, but SG, we even have polygamy here. How comes our population is not growing? My job is not to beat the numbers until they confess. It's to use methods. And of course, the Northern Cape, on the right-hand side, is the one with the smallest population, sitting at 1.4%, and not 1.4 million, 2.2% at the bottom. Now, the two provinces that are moving very fast are Gauteng and the Western Cape. Gauteng is growing a lot more quicker, but I'll come to the point what drives their populations, and indeed, the others. So every province, the absolute numbers are growing. But as the others, like Gauteng and the Western Cape, grow faster, they make the others start to lose the share in terms of percentages. And of course, we can see that those that are going down are KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and the Free State. We will come to that, and we will talk about... So the only figure that we project is what we call population mid-year estimates, where we are saying that between 2021 and 2026, net migration in Gauteng would have actually reached about 800,000, 786,903 to be exact. So what I want to put it in this way, the darker color, if the darker color is shorter than the lighter color, it means that province will continue to be growing a lot more faster. So you can see at the bottom, Limpopo, Eastern Cape, the darker color is actually bigger than the lighter color. So they will continue to lose their share of population in percentage form, because net migration doesn't favor them. We have more people leaving those provinces. Now, let us look at the people who are going to Gauteng. We can see that at the bottom, people who come from outside South Africa, 50% of them choose Gauteng. But in terms of locally, Limpopo is the biggest supplier of Gauteng. If you don't believe me, just look at who's talking to you now. I'm just telling the truth. Yeah. And then followed by KwaZulu-Natal, followed by the Eastern Cape. And of course, let us look at what we call fertility. Now, fertility is very interesting. You can see the dotted line there is telling us that the dotted line is the national average. So with fertility, it's the number of live births that a woman will give birth to in her lifetime. We don't use men as an indicator of fertility. Men are never a reliable indicator. If you don't believe me, wait until you attend their funeral. You will know what I'm talking about. So let us look at Limpopo. It's leading about 2.94, almost 3 children. So it works like this. Fertility, if it reaches 2.1, what's that percent, we have reached what we call replacement. If me and my wife give birth to 2 people, we haven't contributed anything to the population. We simply have replaced ourselves. So I want to know how many of you are contributing to the population here. Imagine everyone was replacing with 2, and they're all dying 2. The population would never grow. So, but I'm also asked, but what about when there is polygamy? We treat every woman as a measure of fertility. We don't use men. So if you have 5 wives, it's okay. You and the first wife, the second wife, how many children are you having? If you replace yourselves, you are not contributing to the population. So we can see that dotted line, Gauteng and the Western Cape start falling below national average. Whereas Eastern Cape and Limpopo are much more higher. So, of course, the one for Limpopo, one of the things that we should also understand, a little percentage of, we are seeing another language that's emerging now in Limpopo called Shona. So a little percentage is contributed by people who are coming from across the border. And don't think that no matter how much forces you have to get them out, migrants, documented or undocumented, they always find reasons and ways to stay. So if we want to use official statistics, we rather prepare for their stay. Now, let us look at the economy. Karabo, do I still have a lot of time, little time? How many? 15. Okay, 15 I should be able to move. Now, I want us to talk about the economy. You will see 3 dark colors right here. So that is about 2006, 2005, 2006, 2007. It is at the time where we got what we called, we were benefiting from the commodity boom. So our economy was growing a lot more higher, relatively doing well. But around 2012, 2011, 2012, in the National Development Plan, you will remember in the earlier speaker, we agreed that we want to start tracking the economy to see if it's growing at 5%. I don't use words like fortunately or unfortunately, I just make numbers. And for us as statisticians, there is no negative number, there's no positive number. All numbers are the same. Even a 0 has value. If you don't believe me, my son comes to me in the morning. He says, "Dad, please give me 100 rand." I say, "No, it's okay, I'll give you 100 rand. But he says, "Since you said 0 is nothing," so I had learned a big lesson. Since you said 0 is nothing, just add a few 2 zeros on the right-hand side. So always, if you want to say 0 means nothing, watch where it is. Don't just start saying it means nothing. So now, in 2008, we had what we call the global economic meltdown. And indeed, in 2009, we had our economy going on a negative growth. It contracted or it went on a slump. So usually we get asked, but why didn't it go on contraction in 2008? But for those of us who grew up in the valleys, we know that when it rains in the mountains, it takes time for water to reach the valleys. So this is what was happening. The bigger economies were affected here. We were affected in 2009. After that, our economy grew the highest in 2011 at 3.2%, and it has never grown any higher. Then came COVID, 2020, it knocked us down, straight to 6.2% in the negative. And then we recovered, and we may think we have recovered a lot more by 5%. But I will give you a good example. When we were small here, we used to see vehicles. We used to think cars are very huge things. But now that we have grown taller, we know cars are not as huge as they thought they look. It's the same with cattle. So we were moving from a very low base. So this is what we call an aberration in economic terms. So our economy has just been growing here, 1.9%, 0.7%, 0.6%, An economy that is not growing will never create jobs. An economy that is not growing will never take people out of poverty. An economy that is not growing will not bring the development that we so desire. And this is something we need to watch out. And I brought this slide just quarter on quarter so that we can see, when we look at quarter on quarter, look at how it's growing. 0.1 there every quarter, 0.3 there. 0.1 is not even a percent. It's one step towards a percent, so we are not making progress. But my job is to measure. When I'm busy making the numbers available there, I can only talk about what the numbers are saying. Let us look at the structure of our economy. The structure of our economy is quite interesting. Sometimes I hear that we need to go back to agriculture, agrarian reform, and I'm not underestimating the role of agriculture. We need food security. The structure of our economy is 22% finance. That is, banks occupy 40% of that space, insurance companies and banks 40%. Then we have consultancy companies, we have real estate, we have other business services, whether it's lawyers, engineers, and the like. Personal services, what's that? Education and health. Most of us here, our children are going to private schools. When we are sick, we go to private clinics. And of course, the hair that we do also belongs to personal services. And we go to trade, manufacturing. Manufacturing was number one in 1994. It has actually declined. Almost all those industries that we used to find in Babelegi, Eitenhage, Tsanin, they are no longer there. And of course, right at the bottom, we see agriculture at 5%. Construction has been depressed for quite some time. We can see construction is right here. It's right here. It has been depressed for quite some time. Provincial economies, Gauteng is the biggest economy, as we will see. Gauteng is the biggest economy, followed by KwaZulu-Natal, followed by the Western Cape. The way they are structured in terms of their share of population, and we can see right at the bottom is the Northern Cape. And of course, when we look in 2024, any light color you see, it means that economy didn't grow, it went in the negative. Any color green, it means it grew. The darker the color, it means it grew the stronger. So we can see Gauteng continues to grow very strong, followed by the Western Cape, and indeed Limpopo, followed by Gauteng, followed by the Western Cape. But that's not enough. I want us to look at issues like in terms of GDP per capita. We can see that Gauteng and the Western Cape are leading right at the top. And of course, as they lead, they are above the South African average. If you look from the top, the South African average is number 3. And of course, right at the bottom is Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. Now, let us remember, GDP per capita, put in simple terms, is the economy able to carry the weight of the population is having. So we will remember where most of the children are being born. Eastern Cape and Limpopo. Look at Eastern Cape and Limpopo. They are right at the bottom. Their economies are not strong enough to carry the weight. That is why we all run away. And then, of course, I'm going to move a little faster so that Karabo doesn't beat me up. Yeah. Let us come to public finances, and I will just touch base. I know my sister Tsakani is going to talk a lot more. The South African government spent about 2.3 trillion on various functions in the financial year 2023. Obviously, we collect this data later. And of course, public debt transactions are both the largest line item, but also recorded the sharpest increase. So one of the things we should understand, public debt is the largest, but it's also having the sharpest increase, having gone up by about 40 billion from the previous year. And of course, we are saying that public debt transactions accounted for 308 billion, or 13.5 in the financial year 2022-2023, right on the right-hand side. Karabo, how many minutes am I left with? 5 minutes. Yeah. We have, in terms of labor markets, we have 16.8 million people who are employed. 8.4 million people are not employed. They are actively looking for employment. Those are the ones that retain an unemployment rate of 33.2% right at the bottom. The 8.4 million do not include your discouraged work seekers. So when we take the 8.2 million plus the 3.4 million discouraged work seekers, plus another 800,000 who said, we didn't look for employment, but if employment came, we would have taken it, we come to 12.6 million people unemployed. And that is our challenge. Releasing what we call the expanded unemployment rate of 42.9%. Now, having said so, we can see that graduates have the lowest unemployment rate. So education, 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 other tertiary. But when we look at matric and above, below matric, we can see they are above the national average. So matric is no longer the most fashionable thing to have. Black African women are affected the most. The nation has an unemployment rate of 33.2%. Theirs is sitting at 40.2%. So it's about 7 percentage points higher. And when we look at what we call the expanded unemployment rate, we are sitting at about 51.3%. So of all the working age women, about 4.96 million Black African women are not in employment. 466 colored women are not in employment. 100,000 white women are not in employment. 60,000 Indian, Asian women are not in employment. When you combine all women, more than 5.5 million of women of working age are not in employment. Actually, out of the 16.8 million, 9.4 million are men who are employed, 7.4 million are women. So there's a gap of about 2 million. Yet women are in the majority in our country. Let's come and talk about the young people. There are about 10.3 million young people in our country. Of those, 3.6 million are not in employment, education, or training. They wake up and sit. And after 9 months, when the parents want to know what they've been doing, they are expecting a grandchild. So these are kinds of challenges that we are facing. Where did most of the money come from? Most of the money that at household level that was earned came from work, 68.8%, 12.5% from imputed income, where we asked you to rate your house if you were renting it, even if it's paid up. But there's this one, 1.5% from capital. I will explain it as I'm moving to conclude. I will conclude very soon. Let us look at the population groups. This is income, this is expenditure. So the whites are earning on average household level 676,000. Their expenditure is 408. So they have almost 270,000 of disposable income. The Indian Asians who are catching up with the white population group are earning 417. Income is the black dot, 417. Their expenditure is 285,000. You can see the gap shows a bit that there's still a gap. These are the two population groups that are above the national average. The colored and the Africans are the ones that experience similar problems in society. Teenage pregnancy, cheap drugs, nyaupe, and everything. Unemployment is theirs. And then look at the disposable income for the black Africans. It's about 35,000 rands. So now, when you look at that, if we bring in the median, it's even worse. The black Africans have no space. The coloreds have no space. The Indian Asians have a little space. The whites have a lot more space. So that 1.5% of income we saw from Capital Karabo is what whites are. They have their money. They also invest it to get profit every month. When you are worried about the repo rate, they are not worried. They are getting more money into their... Actually, they want the repo rate to go higher so they can get more money into their pockets. I'm going to skip a few slides. I want to talk about the drivers of poverty. Drivers of poverty are, if you do not have an advanced number of years of schooling here, as well as when you don't have a job, you are going to remain poor. So education, education, education. Even when some say education is not important, what happens now? What are the people living on? I want us to focus on the light color in the middle. Those are grants. Look at those provinces, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, who have the highest fertility. Those children are surviving on grants. Because in the Eastern Cape, for example, salaries and grants are almost the same level. Yeah. And then whereas, why do we need evidence, Karabo? Why we need evidence, and this is my last but one slide. We need evidence so that we are not driven by political ideology. We use evidence all the time. An ethical behavior where we start thinking, no, this should be there. We should take this road to my village. It can't start there. We need empirical evidence. We can't be arbitrary. I can't say I was at my aunt's village last week and say all people are poor. I can't say that I was seated in this room and looking at the people that are here and say South Africans or people living within the borders of South Africa are so wealthy. Of course, you will remember the Capitec CEO recently said there's no unemployment challenge in South Africa. If you were to come here, you would think there's no unemployment challenge. But go out there where the people who are unemployed are, you will find them there. And not only that, that is called aggregation bias, by looking at a picture in front of you and making conclusions about that. And some commentators said Zimbabwe has a very low unemployment rate. If Zimbabwe had a very low unemployment rate, Zimbabweans would not be coming to South Africa. We would be going to their country to take up jobs. But otherwise, there's also power of influence when you don't have empirical evidence. Even within the same political party, people always fight that we want it to go this way, this way. This slide says Ndihela Kwala, and you have to hear this one, Karabo. This one you must hear. It says Ndihela Kwala. In Xitsonga, it means I finish here. When I was young, growing up in the village, our mothers could not read and write. We were their scribes. So when they wrote letters to our fathers in migrant centers, they could not finish a letter because we were their scribes with a note, I love you, my husband. We were not supposed to hear that. Our mothers loving our fathers. We were going to go deaf according to a village legend. And we were not going to write, I miss you, my husband. If we wrote that, we were going to go blind according to village legend. So mother and father had a standard way when it came from Joburg Ndihela Kwala. When it goes to Joburg Ndihela Kwala, in Shivenda Ndifelela Hanefo, in Sipedi Kifetsa Hona Mo, Kasitswana Kifetsa Hona Fa, in Xhosa ngiceda khona apha ngomkhulu umbuliso. And of course, in English and Afrikaans, because they could read and write, so they would say, I miss you, my husband, because they were empowered. And they could even say Eklif Veryo, because they were empowered, they could read and write. Never and never again. Close quote. Mandela once said, and should we leave any sections of our society behind? Men, women, black, white, otherwise, when we have evidence to finish or to help us finish the story. So in Ndebele, they would say Ngiyathokoza when they ended the letter. In Swati, they would say, Amangente angnawo, bongwane. And of course, in isiZulu, Karabo, they would say, Amaningi angnawo. So now, Amaningi angnawo, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Statistician General, for that invigorating input. But you have given us a lot to think about. You have given us more than just data. You have reminded us that behind the numbers, there are people. Behind the numbers, there are faces. Behind the numbers, there are lived realities. And we have a moral obligation to ensure that we turn the corner. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, let's put our hands together for the Auditor General of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke.
Thank you very much, Karabo, and to my brother, Mwanati. Isn't he just fantastic? What an inspirational speech. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here. I actually was so mesmerized by Mwanati that I even forgot I needed to deliver a speech. But let me start by greeting the leadership of SAPAM, starting with the president and the vice president, and all the leadership within the institution, as well as the members of SAPAM, all of you present, a very warm greeting. I'm particularly honored to have the opportunity to dialogue with you. I'm glad that, Karabo, you started the session as you did this morning to invite a dialogue, and I'm pleased that there were some questions that allow me to really address some of the conversation pieces and aspects that you want and so richly deserve. It's important that we create these opportunities for dialogue in a gathering like this, where it is the professionals responsible for running public administration in South Africa who are confronting the challenges and trying to find a path towards a better public administration across the public sector. So, as the Auditor General, our mandate is very clear. We are here to promote transparency, efficiency, and accountability in the use of public resources, and ultimately to contribute towards building institutions that are effective in delivering on their obligations to citizens and communities. We consider ourselves partners in upholding our democracy, the very pillars of our democracy, by ensuring that government entities not only adhere to laws and regulations, but they embrace the highest ethical standards and sound financial management. I think the address by the Statistician General highlights the very complex and pressing challenges that we face as South Africa, from financial mismanagement and corruption to the service delivery gaps in municipalities and public entities, because behind those numbers are these very problems around financial prudence and financial management. The problems that we talk about when we present our audit reports as AGSA directly impact the lives of citizens, and that's what we try hard to communicate. That beyond the debits and credits, beyond the clean audit, unqualified audit, qualified audit, those technical speak, beyond all of those, beyond the colors of green and purple and yellow, are lived realities of citizens. And it is a mission we've taken up for ourselves as Team AGSA to say that our work must ring true to the lived experiences of citizens. The question we keep asking ourselves, yes, audit technically, audit in accordance with your independent audit mandate, but how does your report reflect the lived reality of citizens? And how does it impact positively the lived reality of citizens? So I hope that you've experienced that in the work that we've been doing over time to try and push ourselves beyond, as I say, the debits and credits, but to say, to what extent are we contributing to the critical conversations and the pressing actions that must be taken by the people that run the state? What we see is that when we have such weak public administration, such low levels of accountability, such limited transparency in how government runs, it erodes the trust that citizens naturally ought to have in their leaders. It also diminishes their confidence that the future will indeed be brighter than it was yesterday. And in fact, what we're seeing is that if we don't have the critical conversations, our country will continue to grapple with what is a deep public sector financial crisis, marked by rising debt, persistent budget deficits, and weakening fiscal sustainability. The crisis that we face, so last year earlier this year, in fact, you saw the Minister of Finance issuing budget 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And I'm hoping that all of us understood that there's a crisis around access to the fiscal resources we need, a challenge and a crisis that we have to confront around what we prioritize, because we don't have all we want. So what do we prioritize? And so I'm hoping that in appreciating that discourse, you didn't just celebrate that the VAT hike didn't happen, but rather you were able to understand that we are in the moment of crisis and we have to figure out a way to respond to it. And what we see is that we've got to respond to it by driving urgent improvements in financial management, which must be disciplined. And we've got to drive accountability reforms. This moment of crisis places a premium on prudent leadership, one that prioritizes sound budgeting, disciplined execution, rigorous oversight, and unwavering ethical standards. Public administration must be staffed by people who are vigilant custodians of taxpayer money, ensuring that every rand spent translates into meaningful outcomes for communities. Now, you might wonder, why is the AGSA speaking like this? Well, here's the thing. Our audits do much more than find irregularities. We don't only want to talk about irregular expenditure and material irregularities. Our audits and our reports offer unique insights into the systemic weaknesses and provide some guide on areas for improvement. The audit mandate that we have as Team AGSA, which sees us auditing every single public institution every year, and it's actually quite unique. It's not the norm across countries for an Auditor General to be required to, given space to, given the resources to, audit every single public institution every single year. And now the Public Audit Act specifically says, provide an opinion on financial statements. So what do you say? You do the work you must do to give the reader of financial statements a sense of whether or not they can rely on those financial statements. And if you can't rely on financial statements, your confidence in what you're being told by the people managing the state will diminish. So that's quite important. Our audit mandate also says, give a conclusion on whether performance information is credible. Performance information is essentially your service delivery scorecard. What did you do in accordance with your mandate and in accordance with what you agreed with those that oversee you, you would do. Our audit mandate also says every year, audit whether or not in the course of deploying public funds, the people running public institutions have ensured that they observe the rule of law. So often you hear us talk about irregular expenditure, we say there's non-compliance, we say that there are no controls to make sure that compliance is achieved. When you hear repeated non-compliance, and maybe we've become a little bit numb to the big numbers of irregular expenditure that we report, when you hear that, I'd invite you to understand what it tells you. It tells you that you do not have yet the systems, the controls, the disciplines to ensure that things are done in accordance with the rules. Now, there are some rules you might not like. What you must do is change them. But whilst you change them, you must make sure that public administration is equipped and expected to observe the rule of law. You can set a very noble target about how our Black economic empowerment priorities will be met. You can set wonderful policies around economic development. You can set fantastic frameworks. You call them the new growth path, you call them something else tomorrow. But you will never, ever achieve them for as long as the people implementing have no regard for the rule of law. And I say that boldly because what we see through our audits is that people will sort of want to trivialize irregular expenditure. I believe that we trivialize non-compliance at our own peril. Will things always be perfect? Absolutely not. Is there sometimes a little slip that has little consequence? Absolutely. But then we don't trivialize it. We confront it and we fix it. Because you must set a tone that says the rules we have must be observed. Because here's the thing, if tomorrow you have the most ambitious and let's call it the Rolls Royce of legislation for public administration, whether it's procurement, whether it's recruitment, whatever it is, if you have not set institutions that respect the rule of law, that set practices, controls, monitoring systems, and oversight and consequence management that make sure that impunity does not prevail, any adjustment we make from a legislative point of view will be one that is done in futility. Our view as Team AGSA is that when we talk about reform, most people want to look at the legislation. So we want to reform by adjusting Public Procurement Act. We want to reform by adjusting the PFMA. We want to reform by adjusting the MFMA. We want to reform by adjusting the Public Services Act. And that may all have a place. I plead with you to accept that actually that's probably 10, 15% of the work ahead of us. The real game is about building institutions that will deliver more often than not on what you expect. And I want to highlight, the issue is not about perfection. So I know when you look at our reports, you're like, hey, but the AG is trivializing, they're pedantic, they keep asking for this and that. Don't overlook those things. Look at them as an invitation to keep improving controls. There's no institution that's perfect. The trick is to be responsive and responsible. It's important that we recognize that accountability doesn't exist to be dealt with by one institution. And I want to come back to what we've called an accountability ecosystem. But before I do that, let me just deal with something around some of the questions that were asked before we started. So I said that we audit and we give an opinion on financial statements, a conclusion on performance report, set of findings on procurement and other areas of non-compliance. We give a view on internal controls, and we give a view on whether or not we've identified material irregularities, and we give a sense of what the nature of those are and what the status is. So when you receive an audit report for every institution, you'll get that. And that audit report is there for all 1,000 audits that we do every year. And then what we do as Team AGSA, we compile what we call a general report. So when you hear the headlines, it's because the law says, as AG, I must make sure that I compile a report that talks about what we've done, what we found, what our analysis and recommendations are across the system. So that's our general report. So you'll see one for PFMA. We're doing another one in November because we finished the PFMA audits just about July, August this year. And then we'll do the MFMA one in about May next year. So that's why we do it. The power of these instruments, the individual audit report and the general report, is that it provides you unique, independent insight on what's happening across the system of government. It provides you a sense of where the real pressure points are. It gives you a perspective on what it is could be done to improve value chains and to improve even coordination across the different spheres of government, because we happen to audit everyone every single year. Our reports detail findings, observations, recommendations, which we believe, if they're implemented, will support progressive enhancement of performance, accountability, transparency, and institutional integrity. So there's a question asked about, well, should we not be prioritizing performance and service delivery instead of clean audits? Maybe let's grapple with that now. So Section 195 of the Constitution says that public administration must be run in a way that drives efficiency and effective delivery, and it must drive transparency and accountability. My reading of Section 195 is that you don't get to opt out of any of those things. My reading of even the Batubili principles suggests that you don't get to opt out of things. You got to do them both. So I'm not convinced that clean audit vis-a-vis service delivery are diametrically opposed. In fact, from our experience, we've identified that actually they're complementary. So maybe let's give some examples. And these examples I'm trying to give so that we can walk away with a view that says, yes, we must count the numbers and we must deliver, right? A few years ago, I took the time to visit the teams that audit municipalities across the country. I do that every single year. But this particular year, about 3 years ago, I asked a central question. I said, look, you are a resident in this province. You are also an auditor. But let's talk about you as a resident. Tell me about Midvaal. From the point of view of a resident, who lives in Midvaal? And one of the auditors put up the hand. He says to me, no, I live in Midvaal. I said, oh, okay, tell me about Midvaal, because Midvaal, you know, is that audit, that municipality that's had clean audits for a decade. Ne? So I said, help me understand, what is it? Tell me about your lived experience as a citizen of Midvaal. He says, well, you see, every year, representatives of the municipality come around and they ask us about what our needs and wants are as part of public participation. And then they'll come back after they've gone around. They'll come back and say, you in this ward told us you want a road, but the other ward also told us the same thing. We can't do both, so we're going to prioritize them for this coming year. And he says, you know, I believe them because they are transparent about what they're going to prioritize, and then they do it. So when they've done it in the next ward, I know for sure mine is coming. So I have confidence and trust. I said, what else? Tell me about Midvaal. He says, well, you know, when I'm on the audit, because they'll spend like a month or two driving up and down, he says, you know, every time I have to drive from the office to the audit site, I have a problem. I keep getting speed fines. I said, oh, but what's the problem? He says, no, you see, the roads in Midvaal are so good. I said, that's very interesting. Okay, that's a very interesting problem you have. So you contributing voluntary taxes, that's fine. But it tells you something about Midvaal, what one can't say about City of Joburg. I then said, okay, tell me something else. Let's speak to the auditors of Midvaal. How is it like to audit in Midvaal? They said, well, you see, the municipal building is a bit old, but it's in good order. It's not like auditing in other places where we have to worry about where our staff will use the bathroom. What else? Well, when we audit, the people who work in that office, they start their job at 7:30, they take a break at 12, from 12 to 1 it's lunchtime, they come back at 1, they finish at 4, they all go home. So we know when to find whom. That's very interesting. What else? They said to me, the municipal pool works. It's in good order. And it being spring, I think we can all relate to it right now. In all of our municipalities across the country, everyone's talking about how many municipal pools are being opened. That's just a data point about how a municipality functions. Then I went to the Free State. You see, the Free State hasn't had a clean audit for a very long time. So I said to my colleagues, you know, my problem is that you people, maybe you've forgotten what it's like to audit clean audits. You've even stopped advocating for them. You're not even pushing your auditee. You're not anxious to get them to clean audit. Why don't you send one of your team members to go visit the other side? So go find another audit in South Africa, arrange with your colleagues, you deploy one of your members from Free State to go audit in another province where there's a clean audit. I came back a year later, I said, by the way, did you take my advice? Did you send someone? The lady put up her hand, she says, I went. I said, where'd you go? She told me the clean audit. I said, tell me, what was it like? She says, man, I was shocked. What shocked you so much? She says, no. You see, our rules in the office are that if we have an audit query, we give the accounting officer or the CFO 5 days to report back to give us an answer. So I'm used to giving a finding on a Monday and I have to wait until Friday or maybe the next Monday to get an answer. But here, that morning, I gave the CFO some queries. And then when I was driving home in the afternoon, the CFO phoned me and said, look, you know that thing you were asking me about? Listen, I've emailed it to you, but if you can't download it, meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 7:30, I'll give you the memory stick. I'm shocked. I could audit this thing quickly and be done. What does this tell us? It's about culture. A culture of discipline. A culture where people know what their jobs are and they do them. A culture of responsiveness. Are there no audit findings in Midvaal? No, of course there are some. But they're not material. Why? Because when we raise them, they deal with them. It's a culture where the people who are in their roles are equipped to do their work. And they take a sense of responsibility. And that's what a clean audit is. So I'm not sure that having a conversation that suggests that clean audits and service delivery are diametrically opposed. Let's talk about the City of Cape Town. Maybe that's the one that's most topical at the moment, right? It's the only metro out of 8 that has a clean audit year after year. Are things perfect in Cape Town? Absolutely not. Okay, so let me help you understand the difference. City of Cape Town has a stable administration. When the administration changed, in that the council changed after the elections, they left the administration alone. The CM's been in place for a long time, the CFO's been in place for a long time, so are all the other 1657 managers. The City of Cape Town has a competent and diligent audit and performance committee. How do I know this? Well, my auditors told me, but I decided to go and look for myself. I actually read their reports. I was like, this makes sense. I get why year after year they improve their controls. Now I know you're going to say to me, well, why are there no services in Langa? Well, it's a matter of priorities. Why do I say it boldly? Because City of Cape Town and all other clean audits are effective in reporting transparently on what they have done. They will show you what they're planning for, they will show you what their budget is, and they will go and implement it. And then when they come back, they will report every quarter to council, every half year to the province, and National Treasury reviews their reports, and every year to their citizens as well. So when you pick up the report, you'll be able to understand why it is that it's so nice to walk along the promenade in Sea Point, and yet in Nyanga and Langa and Mitchell's Plain, life is bleak. It's priorities. As AG, I can't tell people what decisions to make politically. But as AG, I can tell you for free that regardless of what your politics are, you need a strong, competent administration. One that is given the space to do what it's supposed to do. Because even if tomorrow your politics change, if you've not built the administration you need, you won't be able to do what you wish for. And what will happen? You'll be one of those institutions that keep sending money back to the national fiscus because you've not built the capability to implement projects. If you take a look at the annual reports of the metros, you'll notice there are huge staff complements, but very little in the team that's responsible for infrastructure. And you got to ask yourself why. Metros are there to build and maintain infrastructure for service delivery. So what are all these people doing? If you look at the Buffalo City Municipality, their annual report says this boldly. They had a vacancy for the executive head of department responsible for electrical services. That role was vacant for 60 months, 60. So the 0 is on the right side. Now, let's understand what that means. It means that the Speaker, the Council, the Mayor, the CM didn't pay attention to filling what is a critical vacancy. Now, in Thulamela, you might say, well, it's difficult to find a district engineer to come and live here. Maybe, I don't know. But in East London, if you look at the turnover of staff in most of our metros, other than Cape Town, it's quite high. And that we must ask whom to hold accountable. My view, Speaker, Mayor, CM. These are the priorities. And maybe it's easy to keep looking at local government because we can criticize and point a finger. There's a role for the MEC of COCTA, who's supposed to monitor how municipalities run and report to the legislature. Similarly, a role for Treasury. What we found is that MECs of COCTA sometimes were unaware that they have to give a report to the legislature on how municipalities are responding to audits and how they are performing. We had to go to the law and say, by the way, you know this, you're supposed to do this. And then we said, okay, maybe it's a good thing you did it. Then we went to the legislature and asked, well, do you get this report? Not really. When they started getting it, they didn't know what to do with it. What am I saying? We have yet to build the capability we need. Legislatures, provincial executive, provincial administration, and municipalities. None of us get to point fingers. If you ask what happens at National COCTA, you got to keep asking, how are they fulfilling their role? We've been finding gaps. Why? Because not enough of us have focused on ensuring that we have what we need and we hold people accountable for what they're supposed to do. It sounds like we're being pedantic, But perhaps let me highlight why these things are important. When a municipality compiles its IDP, whether it's Midvaal or Madibeng or Enoch Mgijima. Oh, now you're awake. When they compile their IDP, it's supposed to be reviewed by COGTA in the province. Why is that there? So that the provincial executive can review all of the IDPs and say, are these IDPs going to get us home? And what's home? The development of our province. They hardly do it. If they do it, it's a tick box. Every year, they get the SDBIP, which is supposed to be matching the budget and the actual implementation plan of what they're going to prioritize. And that also goes to COGTA and to the Premier. And why is that? So that they can look at it and say, is this going to get us there? And is it responding to prior problems? Because the job is about gradually improving. If they did it, how would we account for the fact that most of the infrastructure for distributing water in Gauteng is fraught? How do we account for the fact that in Enoch Mgijima, their distribution infrastructure doesn't work, but they're busy building sports field? If that was happening. If the people entrusted with playing different roles in a coordinated and cohesive state across the different spheres, if they were all doing their work, do you think we'd be struggling with repeat audit findings, ongoing irregular expenditure, and now the horrors that some of you have had to now engage with when the National Assembly sent a portfolio committee to the Free State and to the Northwestern Gauteng? If, as a matter of course, the people entrusted with different roles were doing their work. So, I'm trying to answer this question about, is it clean audit or is it service delivery? So we did an analysis. We looked at the ability to spend grants, the infrastructure grants in particular. So we assessed and compared the ones with clean audits and the ones without clean audits. We found that there's a high correlation between clean audit and the ability to spend your infrastructure grant. The ones with the worst audit outcomes don't have the ability to spend their infrastructure grants, and then they send them back. In fact, we must all agree, it's better if they send it back than to misuse it. We've also found that the ones with clean audits are the ones where the interface between the political leadership and the administration is sound, as I indicated. And we found that the ones that have clean audits have the ability to work well with other structures of government instead of trying to deal with things autonomously. One of the areas that's been troubling all of us, and I'm glad that the Statistician General talked about the unemployment in our country. Over many, many decades now, there's been significant investment in the post-school education and training sector, with significant amounts of money placed, let's call it in the SETAs in particular. There are other institutions we must deal with, but let's talk about the SETAs for a moment. SETAs are public institutions. They've got the ability to hire people even outside of the limitations of the Public Service Act. So they can afford to hire the type of expertise they need. They've got their own boards with the participation of labor and employers. And they actually have a very basic business model. It's actually very big. It's not difficult. As a SETA, you get your money, it comes like this. You're like almost like a funnel. It just comes. No, it does. I don't know. Huh? It does. You don't have to raise an invoice. You don't have to collect. It just comes, you know, like every year it just comes, you know. And then you're required to send most of it back to your employers on the basis that they will implement skills development based on the requirements of the sector. So what happens is The CETA board has got 15 people. 3 of them come from the minister, 6 from organized labor, 6 from employers, ne? In every sector. And the idea, very simple, and I think really good, great, says you got to sit back as a sector and agree on what your skills development needs are for today and tomorrow, and work collaboratively to map out a skills development plan for the sector. And then you, as an employer, you must go and have your own skills development plan for you, so that when you take the money that's going to come back to you through the CETA, you then use it to develop skills that is complementary of our big plan as a sector. And then the CETA has a small amount of money, I think it's 20%, that they can use for discretionary grants. And that allows them as a CETA and a board, which is majority labor and employer, to decide on what are the interventions they're going to make towards skills development as a CETA. It's a fantastic model. It's quite simple, really. Then you have like 10% you must spend on admin. What we find is that the 10% spent on admin is a bit suspect, but worse, the discretionary grants are weird. Reminding you that these are not people who don't have skills, so they can get their debits and credits right, so they have unqualified audits. But what are they doing with the money? They'll go and do a prepayment with somebody who's supposed to deliver skills. They'll say, well, we'll give you a contract for 100 million rand to go and train people for skills. Okay, let me just say 10 million for now. 10 million rand, we'll give it to you. And then they'll say, we'll give you 15% as a prepayment, or to get you going. So you take your 15% and off you run. And maybe sometimes they might say to you, just give us a list of who you're going to train, and you give it to them. They don't even check. So it's ID number. Some of them are not there at Home Affairs, but they're there. There's a list. They check. And then sometimes you might even give these young people contracts to say, I'm going to train you, but you never see them again. And you've taken your money, your 15 million rand, and you run into the sunset. And then after a year or so, the CETA just merely cancels the contract with you, and they adjust their financials. So the debits and credits are fine, but what's happened? There's non-compliance, obviously, in terms of how you've dealt with this thing. But what they'll do is they'll pretend that they're just as surprised as anyone else that you didn't do the training. Just as shocked. And this happens every single year. What's going wrong? Well, you've got people who don't have a skills problem themselves. They can do the debits and credits. You've got a board that has got employers and labor. You've got to wonder about who are we deploying as board members, as labor and as employers. And then you've got to wonder about, to what extent is there any real attention to worrying about we do develop skills for people? And this is part of why you have so many young men and women, and especially black women, sitting at home with no skills because they were given pieces of paper and left alone. And when you sit in a room like this, you get a report that says, no, CETA spent 21 billion rand. And we keep wondering, but if it was being spent, what's the impact on the ground? I give you this example around CETAs to merely make the point that clean audit, to our mind, is consistent with the type of leadership that's responsive, that's responsible, that's going to ensure that they worry about delivery whilst observing the rule of law. You can get an unqualified audit opinion, but if you have compliance findings and you have performance information problems, we must look deeper. And even when you have a clean audit, we have the ability to then assess where the problems are. So I hope I've answered the question. It's not, is it service delivery or something else? It's all of it. And so we have to keep asking, how are we preparing the next generation of public administrators to do better? Whether they're in a municipality, in a CETA, as MEC, as a mayor, or in the legislature or in parliament. How are we ensuring that through your advocacy on professionalization, SAPAM, we are insisting that everybody that has different responsibilities actually lives up to them and is held accountable? Not because we believe perfection will ever prevail, but because we know that responsible leadership is responsive and persistent in building institutions. So I know that when we look at the audit reports, we sometimes just get depressed and we kind of look away very quickly. I want to invite SAPA to spend a bit more time interrogating what are we saying, what are the real issues. And you're welcome to have a dialogue with us and push back on the things you believe we've misunderstood. Here's something I've not understood, and maybe this is a part I believe needs some academic attention. So, through our work as Team AGSA, we've been going to visit projects. Ne? So we extend our inquiry beyond the books, we go to the ground. Why do we do this? So that we can help you understand the link between the clean administration from a paper point of view and reality on the ground. Sometimes it helps us understand actually the numbers are wrong, because when we get to an infrastructure project and the number that's been paid to a contractor is X and the number that's in the ground is Y, we tell you that there is a loss between X and Y. And these are real things. These are real things. So in the healthcare sector, it happens in other sectors as well, but in the healthcare sector, there's a weird thing I've not yet understood. Maybe simpler than I think, but I don't understand it. 3 years ago, we went, the books were right, ne? They said, we've got assets, we've built a clinic. And the books were right. So unqualified opinion, that's not a problem. The books are right. The performance report is right, we built a clinic. But then we said, let's go and have a look. When we got there, the clinic was there, but it wasn't being used. For 7 years. So, yeah man, what's going on here? So we used our powers. Now that we've got these powers, we are able to raise material irregularities and get people to follow up. So we say to the accounting officer, you are misusing a public resource and you are causing harm to the public. Then they say, no, you see, I don't have a budget to hire the skilled people that must run the ward. So we said, what are you going to do to fix it? Then they said, no, I'll hire people. So we said, okay. So my team and I were very happy. We said, yeah, we've made a real impact to the lived experience of the people in that town, because now they have the clinic. A year later, we found a similar thing with a neonatal ICU ward in Witbank. Same thing, same response. Again, we applaud. We say, no, man, you see, we're having an impact on the lived reality of citizens, because now it's open, you see. Then we found another one in Gauteng. This is bizarre. George Mukhari Hospital has got highly spec'd ICU beds that were not being used, and yet the hospital contends with queues of people every day. So we then said, well, you're causing harm to the public. Here's an MI. And they said, no, I'll deal with it. Okay, so they dealt with it, and now they've opened the ward. Again, we applaud. This year, we found equipment that is supposed to treat cancer patients in Gauteng. And you know that Gauteng has been in the courts around providing treatment to cancer patients. So I'm trying to figure out, what is it? What is it that we have to think differently about in the administration of public institutions and in the management of public resources? You see, if it was one or two, one would say, okay, those are aberrations, but this is not an aberration. There's a systemic problem. So perhaps the academics can help us understand so that we prepare for a future where every public rand is used to best effect. The fiscus is shrinking. We can ill afford to have these sorts of things. We can ill afford to have contracts given to Tsakani and her sisters and associates to build houses. We have no capacity to build houses. Doesn't matter how much you like me. I have no capacity to build houses. And that we must accept. So you must make sure that you are awarding the contract to someone who will build the houses. What do we have to do differently to get to a future where public administrators don't end up building hospitals and let them lie fallow? There's a hospital in the Free State where it was built, it was also not being used. Same story, no? Then we said, no, but this thing is now being vandalized. You need to deal with it. They didn't. We went back a year later. And then eventually they told us the answer. No, you see, the problem is that when we built the hospital, we forgot to spec a mortuary. So now we can't operate the hospital. Now, I'm no doctor. I'm also no architect. I wouldn't have known this was a problem. But what is it about us and our public administration that leads us to this point? It feels to me too simple to say that it's a skills problem. It feels to me far too simple to say it's a capacity problem. But maybe it is, I don't know. So, dear colleagues, the conversation on is it clean audit or service delivery goes back to it's both. The conversation about what do we do in an environment where the economy is not growing, service delivery demands are growing, the fiscus is shrinking, and yet the demands from all citizens across the country are growing. That is a conversation about prudent, responsible, responsive, effective, ethical leadership. And so when we look at that professionalization journey, those must be the pillars. And importantly, we must worry about all aspects of public administration. Look beyond the accounting officer and the CFO, as important as they are. Look across the HODs in other departments. Look into the responsibilities of people that have been elected and have political office, but have significant responsibilities in the administration of an institution. Maybe I'll tell one last thing, maybe it's an irritation. So, the law says the mayor of a municipality is responsible for overseeing the implementation of a budget. And he or she will receive a report from the CM every month, and then every quarter they'll take a report to council. The law also says the mayor must play a role in ensuring that there is proper engagement with all citizens, not just the ones who want a particular road, but also business. Because that's what the white paper talks about. When it talks about the stakeholders of a municipality, it incorporates business. So we have to ask ourselves, do we have in our municipalities the type of leadership that's up to that task? If you look at a budget like the city of Johannesburg has, if you look at a complexity of a municipality, I believe municipalities are far more complex than a CETA and far more complex than most private institutions. If you look at that complexity, we got to ask ourselves the question of whether or not we have the right people in those roles. In the administration, in the executive, and in oversight led by the speaker. Maybe I flippantly said it one day, I said, look, I wonder if you had to compare the mayor and the speaker of Joburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni to somebody on the stock exchange, what answer would we come to? Whether we have, in those roles, people that are up to the task. There's a conversation happening in Joburg right now where there's no water. It was so nice to wake up here where we don't have to worry about whether there's going to be water. But in Johannesburg, throughout Gauteng, in fact, life is hard. Water is scarce and inconsistent. So there's a conversation happening right now about the board of Joburg Water, who have tremendous responsibility as an accounting authority, and questions about whether there's even a water engineer on that board or in the executive. There are questions to be asked about Joburg roads, and the same would hold for other places. So SAPAM, I want to leave you with this very simple request. Let's be seized with the real action around professionalization. And let's look beyond the administration, as important as it is. Our democracy and our governance frameworks have put in place significant responsibility and authority at people who we don't worry about enough. And our neglect of those levels has detrimental impact on the ability of public institutions to do what they're supposed to do. Beyond a clean audit, which is still, my view, should be the very basic we insist upon. That should not be the thing that mesmerizes us. 30 years into our democracy, we should have been able to build systems and capabilities to get us there. If we don't sort this out, we're going to end up with still an ever-shrinking fiscus, an ever-growing demand for service delivery that's not met. We're going to still be contending with public institutions that can't look after infrastructure because they don't have the funds or the discipline to do it, that can't invest in infrastructure because they don't have the funds, but importantly, their discipline and capability to do it. We're going to continue to have a health sector that has huge liabilities that grow all the time, and yet it wastes money. Education, one of our biggest items on our budget, and an important investment for human capital, and yet significant unattended to inefficiencies. As Team AGSA, we try hard to link our audit work to reality on the ground, and we do this so that we can inform, inspire, and encourage the right sort of action by those that run government. You see, we're independent. The World Bank actually says that AGSA is one of only 2 countries that enjoys full independence. And that's a gift from our constitution. And of course, the ongoing support by South Africans, generations of South Africans. We're a significant institution, 4,000 people. We're an institution that employs over 900 chartered accountants. We train aspiring chartered accountants, young men and women who otherwise would not have the opportunity to train as chartered accountants. Just this year, 300 new CAs came from the audit office. To put that number into perspective, yes, thank you. To put that number into perspective, we were 3rd in the profession. You know, you've heard of 4 big international firms. It means simply that 2 were slightly ahead of us and 2 were behind us. The National Audit Office is a resilient and growing institution. We know that our constitutional mandate and our privileged position as an independent AGSA demands that we continue to be resilient, but also keep stretching ourselves to deliver relevant information that will help build the state. Whilst we don't run the state, we have tremendous responsibilities to support democracy, as the Constitution says. And if I ever forget what it's about, I look into the young women and men in the institution who qualify as CAs, and I look at them, and I know that it means that education is delivering on the aspiration of that individual and will change the profile of his or her family forever. And then I have to keep asking, are we creating a South Africa that will deliver more and more of that or less? Are we developing a South Africa where each of those young men and women will find their place in service of this nation? If we don't change the culture within the public service, we won't be able to keep those young women and men interested in serving South Africa. What are we seeing? Some of them end up in public service, many of them are ending up in private sector, and some are even going internationally. Those who leave the country may never come back if we don't give them hope. And we'll give them hope if we set about the hard and urgent task of rebuilding the public service into one that is responsible, responsive, transparent, accountable, and effective. But thank you for your very kind attention. I hope I've answered the key questions that were bubbling under, and I'm happy to take more if you need me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Auditor General of South Africa for really forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth. Deputy Minister, when you joined us, we had just switched the panel around a bit. We had requested the questions before the presentation. And the discussion that the AG was leading was around whether we should prioritize clean audits over service delivery or whether it's the other over the other. And I think the Auditor General has done justice to that question, that the two are not contradictory. They can and should be able to coexist. And I think that should be the message that we take away, that we need to be able to build effective systems, that really clean audits are just the bare minimum. It should be something that happens without us even having to make a compelling effort, but becomes part and parcel of the fiber of the work that we do in the public service. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a good thing that I started with the questions. Now, unfortunately, because we've run out of time, you will not stand and protest. There are only going to be a few people that are going to be speaking. I see Prof. Makanya is looking at me. I see Prof. Makanya is looking at me. There's also the Deputy Minister as well that is going to just be making input. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to request Professor Makanya, if we can please have the mic. Professor Makanya is here in front. We'll have Professor Makanya making an input. Then we'll have the Deputy Minister just wrapping it up for us nicely. And when we're done, ladies and gentlemen, remember that we've got our sessions where we're going to be presenting our papers. So let's also prepare to ensure that we go into those sessions. Prof?
Thank you so much to our SG and the AG. I mean, there are two things that immediately crop up in one's mind when we have conversations of this nature. I mean, there is this notion that numbers speak louder than words, but the extent to which we understand it and apply it seems to be lopsided. It seems that perhaps when you go into industry, there's a specific meaning that is attached to it, hence the planning that gets underway. But from where we operate, we seem not to really run with that, and it comes as a surprise after the fact. So what I'm simply saying here is one does not have a clear sense whether we have a handle on that, because if we had that appreciation, we would have been using numbers, even in the planning process, so that the projections are actually driven by that specific agenda. But I can assure you that it's non-existent. Secondly, there's one thing that came as a huge surprise to me, to say that we may actually be taking too many things for granted. That as we were beginning to look into the environment, that one of the senior people who's supposed to have understood this in a clear sense, where we said, why did you not do the following? The answer was, no, there was an audit finding. I said, what do you mean? No, I can't contradict the AG. We said, but you are missing the point. There is an audit finding. What have you done about it? When did it happen? So many years ago. You have not even responded to it. And here we are sitting in a situation where we have not attended to the problem, and the community is suffering in the process. And you don't seem to see there's anything wrong with it. You are actually laying the blame on the AG. So that actually is problematic. So which then says that maybe then we need to answer another question. Do we have, as a country, what we may refer to as amnesia in accountability? Or what you'd rather like to talk about as moral amnesia, or the combination of the two, or choices that we make deliberately because we are running away from responsibility and responsiveness.
Thank you, Prof. Can we give the mic to the DM, please? The Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Karabo, and good morning to the leadership of SAPAM. And we really appreciate the two presentations that were done by our SG and the AGSA. I think a takeaway from all of us seated here, it's a mentorship program that the Auditor Generals of South Africa is doing. To be able to have 300 CAs in a year, it's a very good program that they are embarking on. And I think it's a lesson that we should learn. If you remember when the Premier of Limpopo came on day one, yesterday, she was saying we needed to go back to Professor Mokgokong, the late Professor Mama. So it means even in the field of medicine, there should be programs to mentor our kids so that we don't go back to look for, I'm not saying it's wrong to go Kobo Prof. Mokgokong and them, but there must be a deliberate program to mentor new entrants in the field of medicine. I think it's a good thing. You know, in one of the reports that we had, I must also declare, I'm the principal of all the deputy ministers in the country. So you can imagine the work I'm doing. So we get there, we get a report. The engineering body says the type of infrastructure that we're building in South Africa is not up to the standards. But these are the engineers who are being appointed. So, mismatching, it's a problem. But the other thing, the call I want to make to the president of SAPAM, I belong to one NGO, a political NGO. I don't want to say it. I was responsible for local government intervention. And I want to come to the fact that the HESA has said. So we're responsible for Mangaung. And I come from Bela Bela, by the way. And I was a mayor before. One thing that I told the mayor of Bela Bela is that we're a tourist town. Never undermine the amount of people who come in Bela Bela during holidays. Make sure there are no potholes. Imagine when you have planned for your trip and then you get stuck because double puncture or whatever. You'll never come back to that town. So I'm given a responsibility to deal with Mangaung. A call I want to make to SAPAM. Mangaung missed an opportunity on the bucket system. They still have a bucket system now. 75,000 bucket system in Mangaung. I'm not talking about shacks. So every day until Christmas, I say to them, guys, let's do honey sucking. I don't know why is it a honey sucker, that thing. Because that thing, it sucks, it's not honey. So we're doing honey sucking. I said, imagine kids of Mangaung coming home to see their parents, and then they are just looking at this bucket. It's not on. I was removed. Just for doing that. I was removed. Horno kulumela bezu. But the sad thing that they did not know is that the president made me and Pakistan to be the champion of Mangaung. Last week we went there. We said DDM. It was only us. They never cared to call anyone, including the DDM coordinator there. So now I'm saying to SAPAM, please adopt Mangaung. On a serious note, SAPAM, adopt Mangaung and look at it and go and change the lives of those people. I'm telling you, it's a call I'm making from the bottom of my heart when I'm president. Go there and help.
Thank you very much. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude, I'm going to request the Vice President of SAPAM just to hand over our tokens of appreciation to the AG and the Statistician General. As we close, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important for us to remember that we have a responsibility not just only to leave this room carrying reports and numbers, but we have to ensure that we remember the responsibility we have to change the lives of the people of South Africa. The AG has shown us the cracks in our financial stewardship. The Statistician General has reminded us that behind every figure is a human story, a life affected, a community waiting, a promise that has not been fulfilled. Our challenge then is more than just profound. There is clarity to it. We have to turn insight into action. We have to turn data into decisions. We have to turn audits into accountability and ensure that there is evidence of the work that we do and we are held accountable and to the highest moral and ethical standards. Let's remember to take this moment as a call to courage, a call to conscience, a call to action, and a call for us to ensure that we build a capable state that sees people as more than just numbers, but faces that are deserving and worthy of justice. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you all of the best for the rest of your sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.